Philadelphia Inquirer. You can read his wire.com. He's been on the sidelines for longer than me. And his headline for the article was referee shortage. It's a big problem for high school and youth sports that is getting worse. Phil Anastasia with us here on the Pete Thompson Show. Good morning, Phil. How are you?
Doing well, Pete. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing a little probably warmer than you. I got a text message from Mike Frankel this morning, and I said, it's going to be cold at mainland Ocean City. I might not go. And he goes, not as cold as it was last night.
Yeah, I hear that. It's that time of the year, though. That's how it works.
This is crunch time. It's also that time of the year, where every down counts, every play counts. The fans get sometimes a little too spirited. And I thought your piece was excellent. How long had you been working on it? How long had you noticed it? Maybe give me a little bit of the origin of it and what you discovered in writing. This is a column, right? Or is it a story column? I want to accurately describe it.
Yeah, no, it was a news story. There was no opinion in there. It was a straight news story. I've been working on it. I guess I worked on it probably for about a month or so, between other things, Pete. And it was more, it kind of sprung from some stuff I was hearing anecdotally, like we all do, along the trail that, there have been growing concerns about the shortage of officials that, in every sport at every level. And the more I looked into it, the more I talked to, officials in charge of the high school associations on both sides of the river, the PIWAA in Pennsylvania and NJSIA in Philadelphia, in New Jersey, the more, it became clear to me this is a real issue. And, the disturbing thing is really not where we are now, but where we're headed. Everybody seems to think that the situation's only going to get worse just because of some of the factors involved in what has created this shortage and what portends for an even greater shortage in the future.
Well, let me throw out the numbers first that you had in your piece, and I thought they were very telling. You mentioned the PIAA. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so that was the organization that ran the high school sporting events where I grew up. 16,533 registered officials to cover the 13 sports during the 18-19 school year, and that was about just over 1,100 fewer than 5 years ago, that downward trend. And then I know you also spoke, like you said, both sides of the river. You talked to Derek Sellers, the president of the West Jersey Football League. That's 95 schools. And because he kind of sees where things are going, he's starting to ask schools like, hey, you have to schedule a Thursday night home game in the 2020 season, or else we're not going to have enough guys to fully staff all the games.
Right, and that's that was kind of the number one hook of the story. I really was looking for, and I'll tell you, I spent a month trying to find, Pete, an official who had walked away and would explain to me, why he or she had walked away. Again, we heard a lot of anecdotal evidence of, fan abuse, out of control parents, things like that getting worse. I could not get anybody to go on the record with that. I didn't think that my feeling was that nobody wanted to sort of go on the record and saying, I wasn't tough enough to deal with it. It drove me crazy. Although that clearly is the reason a lot of guys and gals step away. So what became the sort of hook or focus of the story, without having that one sort of face of the problem, was this move on both sides of the river to change a lot of games from Friday night, which is our traditional, Friday night football is kind of like, Friday night lights is what high school football means nowadays to everybody, and to move to Thursday nights just because there aren't quite enough crews to cover the games, and there's a feeling again on both sides of the river, especially just given the age of many of these officials, that the shortage is only going to get worse as the years go along.
Yeah, you have great anecdotal evidence in there, too. I mean, like you said, I'm sure that would be I don't want to call it the smoking gun, but to have somebody who walked away and gave reasons why they walked away would have maybe had another layer to it, but it's still an excellent story, Phil. And one of the things that you point out, too, when you had Jerry DiGiovanni in there from PIAA, the rules interpreter, he went right to it. The parents at Little League, CYO games, they're the ones crushing the feeder system because if you're a referee and you put the money in there, it's like $75 to $80. A 50-year-old or a 60-year-old has a little thicker skin and might not care if somebody's yelling at him for $75 or $80. But a 25-year-old, a 30-year-old, they're like, I don't need it.
Well, that's exactly what the trend and the issue that concerns everybody that's involved in high school and youth sports is that there's a shortage of younger officials. And I had several guys tell me if you can survive the wrong word, but if you can do this for 2 or 3 years, you're likely to do it for 20 or 30 because you've figured it out. You've learned how to deal with coaches. You've learned how to deal with fans. It's those first 2 years that create a lot of problems for people that just get involved in it. They aren't as familiar with dealing with coaches, fans, even players nowadays are, I think, a little bit more aggressive than they used to be. And a lot of people, like the National Federation, which is another organization I reached out to, and they're very concerned about this issue. They've done a study that 80 to 85% of people that start officiating give it up within the first year or two. And so that's really the trend. That's sort of like the demographic of this that's creating this problem. There's just older officials who, again, are used to dealing with, the adversity that comes with the job. They can deal with it. I had that anecdote in there about Jerry, kind of laughing at the guy,
right.
Yeah, it's my first game. How'd you figure that out? But the younger officials, they're not familiar with how to deal with this. They're not as experienced in life. And a lot of the fan abuse, again, this is a broad sort of statement. The fan abuse has gotten worse. I mean, I don't think this is any one single factor that's created this, but certainly the fan abuse, particularly the parental abuse at the youth level, has really contributed to this. And that's the trend that really worries everybody involved in this, that you're not seeing as many young officials. Reason being, high school, even though high school fans can be tough and parents can be tough and coaches can be tough, there's some built-in safeguards. There's more administrative control of these events at the youth level, Pete, and everybody can sort of anecdotally.
Forgive me, it's the wild, wild west.
It really is. I mean, the fans are closer. There's a real sense of entitlement, I think, among some parents. Again, I'm generalizing here. Among some parents, contributed by, there's been an explosion of sort of travel sports, which in the last 20 years or so, which is very expensive. People spend a lot of money for their kids to play on these teams. I think that creates a sort of level of expectation. There's a number of factors. I just think, if you think about it, social media in a lot of ways, and our political climate in a lot of ways,
sure,
I think has contributed to a real coarsening of our culture. There's much, much more, I think, aggressive, antagonistic dialogue just in our culture than it used to be. And that certainly, I think, exemplifies itself in sports, which in a lot of ways always reflects what's happening in our society.
Sure does. Phil Anastasia is our guest here from the Philadelphia Inquirer. At Phil Anastasia is his Twitter account, PhilAnastasia, has an excellent column, news piece up right now on Inquirer.com. He wrote it 8 days ago, referee shortage. It's a big problem for high school and youth sports that is getting worse. And again, in the 9 o'clock hour, we're going to flip over to a referee down here, George McClain, who's a white hat for football and has officiated basketball games for many, many years. In fact, you talk about, you had the quote from Gallagher in there that said the average umpire in baseball's 67, the average guy in softball 63. What happens when they walk away? The Harry McMichael, who was the assigner for the Camden County chapter, 24 crews, 6 men each, 16 of them are all 60 and older. And I know in setting up the interview with George last night, he said that, his crews were old, but the age was even skewered because most of his clock operators are in their 70s. And it's one of those things like, you're not going to get a 25-year-old to go run the clock for a high school football playoff game, but you trust a 70-year-old that maybe can't be down on the field, but still is going to, know the rules and understand everything, and that's the guy you're putting in the box.
Exactly, and again, that's part of the trend. There's just, there are these experienced guys, and God bless them. They've done great work for a lot of years, and they continue to do great work. But if you're an insurance actuary, the numbers are going to tell you these guys are not going to be around for much longer, and where are the replacements? And I think that's the number one concern for the National Federation, for all these state associations. They're looking 3 years, 5 years down the line. I mean, Larry White, is telling me that, at some point we're going to be canceling games. We're just
Right.
going to be canceling games. And that's the concern, that just, not that the older guys are not doing, and older gals aren't doing a great job. They are, but, by their very nature, they're not going to be continuing to operate, in those roles for much longer.
Hey, Phil, that quote from Larry White, I'm just going to read that to close the interview out. Then he says, quote, "Sometimes maybe you have to let things get to a critical mass," White said. "In a couple of years, guess what? We won't have games. Then maybe the kids will say, 'Hey, Mom and Dad, I can't play because you ruined it.'" Maybe that's what it's going to take. Excellent quote to end the story.
Yeah, and I mean, Larry's a guy, he's been around for a long time. He's a long-time baseball official. Actually, it was an umpire in the Texas League years ago, a crew chief. So he certainly has a unique perspective on this. And again, he sees the handwriting on the wall, and it's, again, this is a multi-factored thing. It's not simply because of out of control parents, but certainly that's a factor in this, especially I think at the youth level, Pete, where we're not developing, grooming, and attracting the young officials who are going to take the place of these older officials in the next 3, 5, 10 years.